My really strange alien experience. To start out, I'm pretty new to this group and enjoy everything I read as I've been a believer since I first watched Close Encounters as a little boy in '77. Then after a story my dad shared with me of seeing crafts in the skies over Pennsylvania as an over-the-road truck driver back in the '70s. That he only shared with me, not my mom or his family and friends, probably worried people would have thought he was an idiot lol, but he knew I believed in life outside of our world and so did he. My own story is odd and weird and probably seems way out there, but believe me, I'm a pretty rational and sane dude. While I've never been fortunate enough to see any sort of shipcraft cylinder in the skies, I am absolutely certain I saw and was freaked the fuck out by a Earth-dwelling alien being. Don't do drugs, never have drank, don't smoke cigarettes and don't drink coffee. Drink a lot of water and Arizona green tea so my vices are minimal. Living in South Florida for the last 33 years has had its share of showing my some oddball characters. But the day I'm going to share with you was a day like hundreds of others that I was used to living. A good friend of mine, still good friends, played recreational basketball, almost religiously, for 15 years, every Saturday and Sunday morning. At sunup, with a bunch of other guys in a well-to-do area. It was a 30-minute drive to get to the park with the courts. And most times we'd drive I-95 to our southern basketball spot since the traffic was light that early on weekend days. This particular day was a bright and sunny Sunday in the year 2001, forget the month. But I think it was April or May. We finished playing and started to head back home, around 11 a.m. He was driving his car. We alternated weeks of making the drive to play, and we were on I-95. Just talking about the games we had just played and what was on the agenda for the rest of the day. As we are driving in the slow lane just because there were no other cars in that lane. We got about 10 minutes into the drive back north. And pulling up alongside of us was a late model Lincoln. Cream color, with this person driving it, in the middle lane. We were probably doing 70 and this car was doing exactly the same speed and just coasting along next to us. None of that is odd, right? But since I was talking to him from the passenger seat and he was concentrating on the road, I happened to notice the driver of the Lincoln and I was immediately overcome with this feeling that this person was not a human. Like I actually felt this cold streak sort of hit me, which was impossible since we had the windows down. And it was probably 85 degrees. I stared at her for about a minute or so, while listening to my buddy Rich talk about something that happened in one of our games. But I totally was focused on it. She appeared to look like a woman in her 60s. Straight, long blonde hair, almost white with pure white skin, not a blemish or wrinkle to be seen. It had very large, black sunglasses on and was wearing a white blouse top and what looked like white pants. Other than the sunglasses, it was like looking at an albino. Face was sunken in but looked healthy, if that makes sense. Incredibly skinny but also looked healthy. She was making no movements, and both hands were on her steering wheel, yet she was completely still. The car was completely clean, nothing visible on the seats or dashboard, looked very sterile. No window tint, no visual obstructions. It was the oddest shit I've ever seen. So after a couple of minutes of observing her, looking past my friend in the driver's seat, I finally cut him off and almost whispered, "Look at this lady driving next to us." Maybe he thought he was going to see some gorgeous woman driving and not realizing. About 6 feet from us in the next lane was this oddity. He turned his head enough. Remember, traffic wasn't so bad and there weren't a ton of cars on the road. And after about 3 seconds he exclaims, looking back at me, sort of chuckling, "That's a fucking alien." I hadn't said one word to him about what I thought it was, couldn't believe that's what he thought. And I laughed and said, "Sort of looks like it could be." and I was compelled to keep looking at her. We were now driving for about 15 minutes and had about 10 more minutes of I-95 driving to get off at our exit. My friend was now fully freaking out at her image in the car. He kept looking over and became almost manic in how he was reacting to her. I kept looking over, trying not to be too obvious, and kept hoping this lady, if it was a lady, wouldn't feel like we were staring at her. We were both in our early 30s, so we weren't some dumbass teens trying to stir anything up. Until, out of character, my friend started blowing the horn to see if she would respond. I told him to not do that, and he kept doing it. There was no indication she heard it, let alone cared that it was happening. He then was waving his hand out of the window, and still there was no movement or anything other than her looking straight ahead. We were both very weirded out and sort of chuckling nervously, and I said to myself, this lady must be zoned out. Driving with cruise control and wants no part of two men in a car, causing disruption to her day. I told him to cut that shit out, man, she isn't even paying attention. We were about a mile away from our exit from the highway, and Rich finally stopped honking and being intrusive and said, in a total different cadence than his sort of manic state he was in, I can't wait to get off the exit, hopefully she won't get off there too. Well, she didn't. We had driven right next to her for about 14 minutes at this point. As we got into the long merge lane to get off at the exit that ramped up, I looked over at her one last time. She was now about 12 feet from us as we were veering off to exit, and he looked over about 2 seconds later. And about 2 seconds passed by of us both staring over, and out of nowhere, she turned her head violently, looking directly at us both, and opened her mouth as wide as it would open. Held it open for about 2 more seconds, then closed her mouth, looked back directly forward, and was in that same non-moving stature, like she never changed position. We were both freaked out beyond belief. He drifted into the side median on the exit, and the sound of the loose gravel sort of shook us up and got us back to reality. We got to the top of the exit ramp hill, which was an overpass on I-95, and I looked over, back to the highway. And in the 4 or 5 seconds it took for us to get to the top, so I could look back down to the highway, the damn Lincoln she was in was gone. You could see a mile ahead or more with no restrictions, and the damn car was gone. There were no other turnoffs, no place she could have hid. The only place she could have pulled over where I wouldn't have seen it was under the overpass. And she was doing 70 going under it, so she would have had otherworldly braking to stop the car. And there was no Lincoln that could do that. The damn car was gone. We couldn't believe it. We both talked about for an hour or more that day. We have talked about it over the last 20 years a few times, but I've never shared it with anyone else. I know that most of you give people's stories a fair chance. But I have no desire to gain anything, other than to tell what I saw. To this day, I turn 53 this year. It was the most eerie shit I have ever encountered. I may tell my son, who just graduated high school, as he has some fascination with the subject but still has doubt. I hope maybe the story gives him something else to think about. I know what I saw. And I know what I felt that day. He did too. There was no way that person was human. I still see that visage if I think back to that day like it just happened. It's one of the very few memories that is seared into my brain like that. I hope we all see real disclosure sometime in our lifetimes. I would truly love to see that before I'm gone. Post from user Popular Librarian 27 at Reddit.